We question our daily position, seeking answers and definitions. Get the queries off your chest with Ahkam SOS.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. Welcome to Ahkam SOS, the show that discusses Islamic duties and practices. On behalf of Ahkam SOS, the show, myself and the Sheikh, and also Imam Hussein TV and Imam Hussein Media Group, we would like to send our condolences to the Imam of our time, may Allah hasten his reappearance, and also to the Islamic Ummah on the anniversary of the martyrdom of the 6th Imam, Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam. Now, Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam is what our school of thought is named after. And it is where Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam taught so many students, and where our theology, whether it was aqaid, whether it was Quranic tafsir, whether it was usul fiqh, whether it was tariq, it is where our school of thought excelled, and it is where our school of thought became very, very dominant and made a place in Islamic theology throughout the whole of the world. Inshallah, tonight we'll discuss a little on Imam Sadiq alayhi salam and also taking all of your questions. I'm your host, Mohsin Shah, and joining me is Sheikh Ali Ma'ash. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikhna.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Sheikhna, my condolences and condolences to the Imam on the tragic death of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. Can you shed some light on the life of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Muhammadin wa alihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin wa la'natullahi على أعدائهم أجمعين. عظم الله أجوركم وأجورنا باستشهاد الإمام الصادق عليه السلام. Imam الصادق عليه السلام, he was born in the year 83 of the Hijrah in Medina al-Munawwara, about 702 AD, and was martyred in the same place in Medina al-Munawwara in the year 148 of Hijrah, about 765 AD as well. The Imam alayhi salam was in the age of 63 when he passed away. Of course, Imam al-Sadiq salamullah alayh, he witnessed the rise and the fall of many of the so-called caliphs or kings of the Umayyads, and even the Abbasids. So in this era and time, the conflict between the Abbasids empire and the Umayyads empire, the Imam had this opportunity to spread the knowledge of Islam and the knowledge of Quran and the knowledge of his grandfather Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to the world. Therefore, there were over 4,000 students in which they were sitting and learning from the Imam's alayhi salam teachings and hadith. Shia and non-Shia, there were different types of people who came, and they either attended the sessions of the hadith or they had debate with the Imam, like Ibn Abi al-Awja. Some of those who were even atheists who came to the Imam and they had debate. Some of them they converted to Islam and they believed in Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. Some of them, they remained stubborn and eventually they passed away as atheists, and they didn't really made a good use of this knowledge of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. So the Imam alayhi salam, of course, in the time of the Abbasids, engaged in their anti-Umayyad war. على كل حال, the Abbasids came to power with the slogan of Ar-Rida min Ahl Muhammad. They came with the slogan that we came to please the progeny of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is how they tried to attract people to their own kingdom and try to build this kingdom eventually. And sadly, when they took over and they became strong, they started to kill the descendants of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam, the Hassanis. So they start to kill and persecute the Sadat of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. That's why we have many shrines of the what's called as Imamzadeh, specifically in Iran, in Isfahan, in Shiraz, in Qom, in Tehran, North Iran. You have Imamzadeh, the offspring of the Imams alayhi salam are there, buried there. Why they are in Iran? They had to run away from the cruelty and the dhulm of Bani Abbas in those eras. And of course, the Imam alayhi salam, with this vast knowledge in which we see that thousands of ahadith were narrated from this great Imam, in which we have hundreds of books of ahadith and fiqh books based on the narrations of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, in tahara, in salah, in siyam, in hajj, in zakat, in khums, in jihad, in all these fields. You see, we go back to Imam Sadiq's ahadith, because in that era he had the time and a bit of freedom to deliver the message of his grandfather Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and his father alayhi salam as well. Of course, the Imam alayhi salam, as mentioned by the historians, that the one who took the evil act of killing the Imam alayhi salam was Mansur ad-Dawaniqi, through one of the people, in which he gave the Imam poisoned grapes. The Imam ate them and eventually became shaheed and passed away from this world. So we can see that how some of the governments try to suppress and turn off this light of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, in which the Quran says, "Wallah mutimmun nurih." Allah Azza wa Jalla will keep this light going on and will never be turned off at all. Eventually, the Imam Salamullah alayh was buried in the famous Medina graveyard, Jannatul Baqi', next to his father Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam. This graveyard, which was demolished by the Wahhabis in 1925, and before that in 1801, as far as I remember. So till now, those shrines are demolished, in which they found inscription on the qabr of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, which says, "Here is the tomb of Imam Ja'far ibn Muhammad as-Sadiq alayhi salam." Inshallah, one day we will see that there's going to be, inshallah, shrines, zarih, inshallah, and the dome and qubba on those sacred graves of Ahlul Bayt in the Jannah al-Baqi', inshallah.
Inshallah, one day. Just a quick reminder to all our viewers that this is a live show. We do take in all of your questions. If you have any questions you'd like to ask on any topics in regards to Islamic law, please send them in via the WhatsApp, the email address. Give us a call here live in the studio, 0203 515 0199. Inshallah, myself and the Sheikh will be able to discuss and answer any of your queries and questions. Sheikh, now let's kick off with the first question, and that is it permissible to work in a company whose owner is non-Kitabi? However, the products that are being sold do not deal with anything that is prohibited, and there is currently no alternative Muslim employer neither for me to work for.
There is no harm to that, and we see many people now who live in the West. Many of them, or the majority, work for a non-Muslim company or shop, and that should be fine as long as you do not deal with haram items and services. So there's no alcohol selling, let's say, or pork meat selling, or serving on the table, for example, and so forth. If the business or the job is halal, then there's no issue with it.
Shaykhna, if I'm certain I have performed one of the invalidators of wudu, and I'm also certain that I had performed wudu, but I'm not sure which one came first. Did I perform my wudu after I invalidated it, or did I invalidate my wudu? According to His Eminence the Grand Ayatollah Sheikh Bashir al-Najafi, what is my taklif in the situation?
The Sheikh is very clear, and even other maraja as well, that it's not permissible for such individual to start his prayer and other things which require tahara and purity, such as the wudu, unless they are certain that they are pure and tahir. You have to make sure that when you want to start the salah, you have to be certain that you have wudu. You can't say, I may have or may not have. I may have, made my wudu batil and I'm not sure, and so forth, or I don't know if I've had even wudu or not. So you have to be certain that you're pure and tahir with this wudu, so you can start your salah and ibadah with purity.
Inshallah. Shaykh, a question for one of the viewers, and that is, according to His Eminence, the Grand Ayatollah Sheikh Wahid Khurasani, can we act upon the verdicts of one who has passed away?
You see, if you have a living marja' who you are following and he's issuing his fatwa and verdicts, you can't revert back to the one who is deceased. Yes, if you remained and let's say His Eminence allowed you to remain on the previous deceased marja', yes, you can go back to his previous fatwa and act upon those fatwa. But if you follow the marja' now with his fatwa, let's say new fatwa for example, with any regards, then you cannot revert back to the one who has passed away. So it depends on which fatwa you mean. Is it for the one who is now living and you follow his fatwa? You can't go back to the old one, to the deceased one. But if you still remained on the deceased one, by the permission of the living marja', then you can, yes, act upon those fatwa as well.
Shaykhna, if one buys a belt from a Western country but isn't sure whether it is a real, authentic leather or if it's just a synthetic, man-made leather, are they allowed to pray salah with using that leather?
If you don't know, then it is permissible, yes, unless you're sure or someone expert who would be able to distinguish between the fake and the real, genuine leather. Then of course, if you have somebody who can check, then and it becomes known that it's real animal leather slaughtered in the haram way, then of course you have to avoid it.
Inshallah. We're going to go show you guys a short VT now, inshallah. Join us after the VT. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
I have a question regarding keeping pictures of
Is it
scholars
permissible
at
to
home.
plant trees by or
What
over
Islam
the
establish
graves?
based on peace and
Is it permissible
non-violence?
to collect donations for charity projects from
Is it permitted
individuals?
to consume canned food imported from non-Muslim
Is there
countries?
an issue for men looking at non-Muslim women?
To have your questions answered live, call in on +44 2035 150199 or WhatsApp us on +44 7415 092155. Alternatively, you can also email us on Ahkam SOS at imamhussein.tv.
Yes, if you have any questions that you would like to send in, please send it via the WhatsApp, the email address, or give us a call here, +44 203 515 0199. Inshallah, myself and the Sheikh, we will be able to discuss and answer any of your questions. Assalamu alaikum, Shaykhna.
Assalamu alaikum.
Shaykhna, if a Sunni is not sure whether the garment he has is made from wool, fur, hair of a halal animal or a haram one, as in the meat of an animal which is haram for us to consume, is it permissible to perform salah with it on?
Because the one is unsure about, or he doesn't know what type of material is this, then it's permissible for the one to perform the salah with, regardless of being made in a Muslim or non-Muslim countries. And it doesn't matter, because he doesn't know the origin of this material. Is it from the, let's say, wool of, I don't know, haram animal, for example, or slaughtered in a haram way or not? He doesn't know. Then you can pray, of course. There's no issue with it. Unless you're certain that it's from the haram animal, then you have to avoid it in salah.
Inshallah. Shaykhna, speaking on salah, when traveling, if I'm going to board a train and I know that if I board this train, I'm going to miss my salah, as in maybe I'm going to board it before Asr time, and I will, my destination when I arrive will be it'll be around Maghrib time. So I'm going to miss my Zuhr and Asr prayer. Am I okay to take that train, or should I actually maybe buy a ticket for another train, pray my salah, make sure I don't miss it, and then take the train?
Yes, you can take the train, and you're allowed to or you have to pray in the train if the time would not be enough to stop and basically pray outside the train, then you must pray inside the train. Of course, the priority given to praying while you're standing, for example, with the ahkam of qibla and all the ahkam required. So you have to make sure that you pray and you do not make the salah qada, because you can't leave the salah just because you're boarding a train. It's a non-stop train to one destination, for example, and it's going to be qada as well. You have to pray inside the train.
Inshallah. And probably the same with planes as well.
Exactly.
Shaykhna, a question for one of our viewers, and that is it mandatory that the body is motionless during standing for prayer, in the position of in prayer?
Yes, of course, one of the conditions of salah to be motionless and stable while you're praying, so you don't incline to the side.
Or you mean the rocking?
Exactly.
Very common
exactly.
with people. Yeah.
And you don't lean to something while you're standing and reciting Hamd and Surah and so forth. But for the one who is compelled, a disabled individual who needs to be, depending on something, on a staff or a stick or a wall, for example, then they're allowed. Compelled one is exempted anyhow.
Sheikh, another question for one of our viewers, and that is, if one doubts whether or not that he has performed the ghusl of janaba, what would be his ruling?
Again, there's a doubt that I may have done it or not. Then of course it becomes obligatory and wajib for the individual to perform the ghusl of janaba anew. But of course, if somebody after the ghusl, he came out and he had doubt, was the ghusl correct or no? It's valid, there's no issue with it.
Okay, excellent. Shaykhna, if an individual has paid khums on a certain amount of money, then he has purchased a land or a property with the money. Now this individual, he now has passed away. His son has inherited the land or the property. He decides to sell it. Does he have to pay khums on that money?
You see, khumus is not payable on inheritance. When you receive the inheritance, you don't have to pay khumus. I think there's another exemption, and that's the mahar, the dowry. If she receives the dowry from the husband, then there's no khumus to be paid.
Yes.
Yeah, unless there are, exceptional conditions in which, he's liable to pay, for example, and he couldn't pay, and so forth. Then, of course, the hukum comes in a different way.
Inshallah. Shaykh, a question for one of our viewers, and that is, if a person dies, what is our responsibility towards him? Firstly, if he has kept an annual account of khums, and secondly, if he did not.
Initially, if you know, let's say, you don't know that if this person used to pay khums or not. So, you do not know. A mu'min died, let's say your neighbor, he passed away, and you want to take over in charge of his, let's say, inheritance, and so forth. Then, of course, you would assume that he pays, for example, and nothing is required to be paid. But if you knew that this individual is liable to khumus and he didn't pay it and he passed away, then you have to take out from his inheritance the khumus and pay on behalf.
I see, inshallah. Shaykhna, according to His Eminence, the Grand Ayatollah Saeed Hakim, who is based in Najaf, I believe, is it allowed for the females, our sisters, to have what we call weaves? So braid their hair with fake hair. Sometimes it's human hair, sometimes it's hair of animals such as goats and camels and so forth. Is this allowed and acceptable according to the Ayatollah?
Yes, the Sayyid mentions that it is permissible, there's no issue with it. But you have to make sure that you don't show it to the non-mahram, because it's part of the beautification and the beauty, which you cannot reveal it to others. So you have to make sure you're wearing some kind of scarf or chador to avoid being seen by the non-mahram when it's attached on your hair and your head.
Excellent. Shaykhna, if a woman is not obliged to obey her husband in household matters such as cooking and such like, Why is she obliged to seek his permission when leaving the house? This results in controlling her movement. Does the husband have the right to imprison his wife for life?
Not at all. The husband has no right to imprison his wife. And we have many narrations which advises the husbands to take care of the woman and the children. That take care of those two, and especially the woman, to respect them, to be lenient with them, and so forth. The hadith in different methods and different ways has been said with this regard. But of course, on the other side, there are rights, both sides' rights. So the woman should observe the rights of the husband, in which there's a wajib right, in which she has to offer facilitate the marital intercourse, and to ask for permission before leaving the house. These are the two main wajib rights in which the woman should observe when it comes to her husband.
I see.
Otherwise, the husband has no right to enforce her or to, ala kulli hal. There must be some kind of respect to a great level from the husband towards his wife, and vice versa.
Shaykhna, why do some men feel disappointed when their wives give birth to females? Now, if we look in the Quran, Surah 16, verse 58, it states, if one of them receives tidings of the birth of a female, his face remains darkened, and he is wroth inwardly, and his wrath inwardly. So the Quran even shows, at the time of the Meccans, at the time in Arabia, that when it was, when a female was born, it was bad news. Some of them used to even bury their female babies and so forth. Why is this?
Well, this is an improper behavior of the era of the Jahiliyyah and ignorance time, in which they used to, as you mentioned, to bury the girls alive, just to scare of being ashamed in somehow in future. So they think about the next 20 years, for example, what's going to happen to this girl, for example. But we see Islam came and encouraged for the one to respect, the female children, his daughters. So we have a hadith from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He says with this regard, "Ma min baytin fihi al-banat." There's no house in which has girls in it, daughters. إلا نزلت كل يوم عليه 12 بركة ورحمة من السماء. Unless there would be 12 mercy and blessing would be poured on this household. Imagine having daughters, female children would bring every day, would descend from the heavens into your house every day, 12 barakah and rahmah, mercy and blessings. Such a great means of having, female children. And then in another hadith, وقال صلى الله عليه وآله من دخل السوق, the one who enters the market, فاشترى تحفة, and he bought a masterpiece, or let's say a gift, and then فحملها إلى عياله, and he takes this gift home. Then the hadith says وَلْيَبْدَأْ بِالْإِنَاثِ قَبْلَ الذُّكُورِ, and make sure that you start giving this gift to the female children before the male children. Why? Because overall the females have passion, compassion, emotions, in which must be preserved and respected and observed. Because otherwise, if you don't respect these emotions and compassions, then they might, na'udhu billah, turn out when they reach the age of teen and puberty. Then they might find someone else to give them these emotions and passions and so forth. So that's why lots of encouragements on taking care of the female children than the male children.
Shaykhna, is the consent of a woman in marriage conditional before the aqd and intercourse? if the woman is coerced into marriage by being morally threatened by her father, and her marriage is without her consent and choice, is such a marriage valid? I mean, I've heard plenty of stories where, unfortunately, sisters in the community are forced into marriages and so forth. They have no choice, emotionally blackmailed. Are these marriages valid according to Islamic law?
Well, without her consent, it's not valid. مشكلة يعني. This marriage is a problematic. I was even asked by some brothers that there's an email or a WhatsApp message that someone is asking that you know, I mean, they're not married and they've got children, but the woman was forced into the marriage. So are those children are haram? So you see complications when it comes to forced marriages and trying to bring two together in this well, improper way. على كل حال. You have to make sure that you get both consents, the man and the woman, before the marriage. Otherwise, things will be problematic. But على كل حال, the one should go back to the marja to see these disputes, to find out what can be done. على كل حال.
Inshallah. Shaykh, a question for one of our viewers, and that is, will Allah forgive the parents who force their daughter to marry?
Well, it is not permissible for the one to force them to get married, but if they did so, they have to please their daughter and, of course, ask Allah's forgiveness and istighfar for such act. And Allah Azza wa Jal is Ghafoor Rahim, but they have to avoid doing this for the future to any other member of the family or the even community.
Shaykhna, a question from the WhatsApp. That is, I'm not familiar with fiqh because I'm a convert. Okay, so a person here has reverted. My question is whether legal or no if the marriage is mut'a, but the dowry and the time period and are determined by the man, while the woman or the lady doesn't understand at all about the rules of mut'a marriages. Okay, so if in this case it's a revert sister, she doesn't understand mut'a fully. She doesn't understand mut'a. And the dowry and the time has been set by the man, and most likely he's either he is her representative and recites the aqd, or maybe he'll give her a piece of paper to read, and she will recite the aqd, which he will agree to. In this situation, in this case, is it valid? Is the mut'a valid?
You see, the man needs to explain to her how the mut'a marriage works or practiced. He needs to give a general or overall view of this. Let's say she's a Christian, for example,
Yes.
and she have no idea about this type of marriage in Islam. You have to explain to her that, let's say, this is some kind of a contract of marriage. In our belief, you have to read, I have to read, or she has to read, or in somehow, or the Maulana on behalf, for example, who reads this aqd of the nikah, for example. There are, for example, timing to be set for the duration. Is it 1 year, 2 years, 6 months, and so forth. Also, how much is the dowry, the mahar is, and so forth. So just generally to explain to her the situation. Otherwise, you can't just hide yourself and read it by yourself and say, okay, we are halal now, without her knowing anything about the process of this marriage. So you need to explain to her briefly, in general, what this type of marriage is about.
Shaykhna, final question, again from the WhatsApp. What is the ruling on mixed gatherings? For example, if there's an occasion in my house and there are women and men sitting down in the hijab and respect, is this permissible? So I guess, someone's invited guests and so forth. Sometimes happens, with especially with family members who know one another, cousins and so forth, where the women, ladies and sisters will all be in hijab, maybe one side of the room, or maybe sitting alongside with other men and so forth. Is this Islamically acceptable?
Well, if there is no some kind of, let's say, mixing in terms of losing the values of hijab by, let's say, cracking jokes, laughing,
Okay.
and, for example, what is known as mufakaha, banter, and so forth, in which causes some kind of lust, some kind of temptation, then of course haram. They have to avoid it. And we encourage because of avoiding such falling into the haram. But if it's just a normal family gathering, somebody speaks to, to the other side, for example, with humble, with respect, without any lust, without any issue, that should be fine. To the extent in which the Shara allows, that's fine. But if it goes beyond that, as I've said, cracking jokes, laughing and so forth, in a way that ala kulli hal causes some kind of temptation, some kind of lust, then of course it's haram. This gathering is haram. But in overall, we can have this side, the men, the other side, the women, and they talk to each other, and the men talk to themselves, just to keep the environment, safer, a safer place to gather, rather than just all mixed together. And eventually, haram, shaitan is there. We have the shaitan, the great enemy, and you got the nafs al-ammara, also a great enemy of the ego, the self, nafs al-ammara, and you have the corrupt society. All these enemies try to destroy and distort and to basically dissolve this mu'min into a place of committing sins and haram. So we try to, as much as we can, to avoid the gatherings which eventually causes haram. Not only such as this gathering, it could be just youth gathering or men gathering, and there's gossip and ghiba, backbiting, slandering. That's haram as well. It's not just a mixed gathering. We have to look at that outside as well. So we try to avoid such gatherings which eventually causes that we commit haram. Even I might be, with a few friends, and we watch a movie, for example, and the movie has haram scenes, and we just watch. That's haram as well. Music played, haram as well. So we have to be careful with these issues, so we don't fall into the act of sin, and we try to do things which please Allah Azza wa Jal and His Prophet, the Messenger of Allah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and his purified family, inshallah.
Ahsan. Thank you so much, Shaykhna, for all your efforts. And thank you to all of you for joining us on this episode of Ahkam SOS. Inshallah, myself and the Shaykh, we will be back on Wednesday, 6:30 here on Imam Hussein TV 3. If you have any questions you'd like to ask, please send them in via the WhatsApp, the email address, or give us a call on Wednesday, 0203 515 0199. Inshallah, we'll see you there. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.
We question our daily position, seeking answers and definitions. Get the queries off your chest with Ahkam SOS.